position that I've taken on the basis of acknowledging that we have two political parties advocating for essentially the same things. It just seemed obvious to me that at some point that conservatives would come together under one banner, and it seems to me the timing is right, especially with the economic crisis that we're facing in Alberta.
I think you've abandoned 442,000 people. I think you did it in the dead of night. I don't think you have a justification for it. I don't think you united the right. He already had a vast majority, and you were the number two by far. I think you sold out.
Ezra, you will have to agree to disagree.
Calling out Danielle Smith, fair game. A lot of people are doing it from very different angles. JJ McCullough is still with us now. And JJ, you have a column, the headline, Danielle Smith's Opportunistic Defection. Interesting stuff there. Lots to criticize her on. And then your column kind of steps into some terrain and a hood that I sometimes reside in, and you get really frustrated at Canadian libertarians, and so much of the column you're just smack talking that whole brand, and you say they relish the notion that their ideology, which worships individual choice above all else, culture, decency, practicality, you name it, is almost heroically unorthodox, and the result is an inflated sense of self-importance coupled with juvenile hostility to the constraints of a party system they consider beneath them. And it may be juvenile of me to ask this, but you know, so you don't feel it was possible, you don't feel Danielle Smith should be criticized outside of her political ideology. You feel it's part and parcel of who she is in her principled core.
I do feel that, and I say that based on my interactions with Canadian libertarians of various sorts over the years, is that I find that often that their commitment to democracy is rather fragile at best, is that a lot of libertarians are not particularly intellectually committed to the principle of democracy as a principle of government. I mean, they tend to feel that
what is the principle of democracy then?
Well, the principle of democracy is that sort of majority rules, and I think that a lot of libertarians have a problem with that because they think that this results in irrational policy making and that it empowers a lot of dumb people who are motivated by things other than libertarianism to have a say in government, and they view that in a more ethical, rationalistic world, it should only be the most ethical and rationalistic and clear-thinking people that should be making decisions that govern society.
Do you believe that the Westminster system or the American system set up by the Founding Fathers is one that does allow unbridled majority rule? That's not to me what Western liberal democracy is at all anyway. That to me is not the democratic system.
No, I mean, obviously it's not unrestrained. It's not a sort of pure democracy in some form, but I mean, at the same time, it does allow, I believe it does broadly reflect public sentiment on most issues. I think that most legislation that's passed is broadly, generally speaking, reflective of the public view on various things, and I think that that's something that irritates a lot of libertarians who feel like the public is frankly misguided on a lot of things and would rather legislation be passed in sort of some other fashion.
So hold on, you think it's juvenile hostility to be concerned about majority oppression of minority rights?
Well, that's not really what I'm getting into here. I'm just
that's
saying,
what you
like,
say in the column. I see that's what you say. Like when you say, and I want to ask you, you say individual choice, which I would call personal liberty. You say why individual choice above all else, and then you include culture there. Well, there are some countries who folks go and we give them freedom in the Arab Spring. They gave themselves freedom in the Arab Spring, and then they vote in Sharia law. So you think it's good that culture, like the culture of the day that may be oppressive for many people, can go in and destroy minority rights? I think individual liberty must be core above majoritarian rule of culture.
What I think is that, culture is a tremendous force in society. I mean, it influences our behavior, it influences our ethics, it influences our standards of right and wrong, and it influences the sort of the rhythm of daily life and the sort of character of the society that we inhabit. And I think culture is a very important principle and is something that needs to be considered very carefully, particularly when we're deciding what kind of laws to pass or what kind of politicians to elect. What will be the cultural consequences of, say, various things that libertarians are very fond of. What is the cultural consequence of legalizing all drugs? What is the cultural consequence of legalizing prostitution? These are questions that libertarians are generally not particularly interested in because, as I say, they worship the idea that individual choice is the highest good in society, and that therefore, if you're confronted with an issue like drugs or prostitution, well, you err on the side of individual choice rather than erring on the side of what will be the cultural context.
JJ, I think you're missing the role that the family and that faith groups play in society. I do not think government has any role in decency of the day, in the culture of the day, in the morality of the day. I don't want government. And most parents, when they think about it, don't want government involved in that either. I think that is what we do as individuals in our private sphere. We cultivate decency and culture and so forth among our children and our faith groups, etc. We don't want the government setting these terms. I don't want the government to. They're trying to do that already in the schools.
No, but I mean, you're using the state to impact the culture in a different way, right? I mean, like if you say that the power of the state can legalize prostitution, or the power of the state can legalize drugs, well, you're putting families at a great disadvantage. I mean, parents complain about this kind of thing all the time. It's like, how do you fight against the tide of sort of the messages that are in the media, or the drugs that are in our communities, or the prostitutes that are on our streets? How do you fight against those kind of corrosive cultural forces if you're just one family?
You do
how
it
does
as
a family
community.
Fight against the power of the state?
That's what we did hundreds of years ago. That's how we ended poverty. That's how we set our morals to begin with. Jesus was not a politician. He's just a guy walking around preaching, and then a lot of people followed him. And that's cool.
No, but when a community organizes, what do? They set up a government that passes laws to dictate the nature of their community and to set certain standards. I mean, a lot of libertarians seem to err much closer on the side of sort of anarchy, the idea that things will just sort of sort themselves out, and that if you have any sort of complaints, or if you have any sort of inclination to use the power of state or the power of the government to maintain certain standards for your community, that is sort of fundamentally oppressive and wicked unto itself.
You criticize Smith for a number of things, loudly haranguing about the LGBTQ community, because we've heard that the rift also comes from the fact that Wildrose is kind of, I don't know the exact quotient there, but you got a lot of libertarians and you got a lot of social conservatives. So the gay rights thing, they are always butting their heads against. And you sort of chastise Smith for being really doctrinaire on that, but I think for some people, it's just they have principles, and some of those principles are non-negotiable. People say to me, all right, Furey, we'll get rid of the debt, but we have to make it illegal to show the Danish cartoons. No, non-negotiable. That's all I'd say. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, I mean, perhaps there's nothing wrong for you as a journalist, or for some other person who exists in a pure realm of ideas, as Danielle Smith once did herself when she was a pundit and a columnist. But the fact is, she was voted in, she ran to be boss of a political party that is a broad coalition of many different sorts of people on the right of center, and that includes conservative, social conservatives, as well as sort of social libertarians like herself. And frankly, it seems like the social conservatives are a much larger constituency in this party than people that think the way that she does. And I think that as a politician, as a party boss, you cannot, merely be so callous and so indifferent to this very important constituency of your party. And I think it's tremendously unprincipled to just kind of abandon them because you realize that your party contains a faction of people who don't necessarily share your beliefs, rather than trying to work constructively with them to just kind of say, oh, you people are a bunch of rubes, I don't want anything to do with you, I'm going to go join this other party.
I agree with you that the entire marriage of those two groups within the Wildrose Party was a bizarre thing to begin with, and if they got larger, maybe they could subsume it like the Federal Conservative Party has done.
It's not that absurd,
it's a weird
it's not, though, because
when
I mean,
they
that's
get
how
to the non-negotiables, that's when it becomes absurd.
No, I mean, the thing is that all conservative parties, in America and Canada and England, whatever, they're all basically broad coalitions of some libertarian people,
but
some social conservatives.
Was extremes, I think, to put social conservatives and libertarians without the buffer zone, which is the PC party.
Yeah, perhaps that's so. And that's why I don't think that the end result of this, even though I very much disagree with sort of the tactics and the techniques that Danielle Smith did to get to this end result, I don't think the end result is itself indefensible. I do think that, as you said, you need to have a sort of broad coalition in which there are some sort of people in the middle. And then ultimately, the conservative flavor is that which is something that everybody can agree upon. You focus on the commons, you don't focus on things that divide the party. And I think that Danielle Smith, by being such a doctrinaire libertarian to lead what was supposed to be a coalition party, I think just sort of exacerbated those tensions, and I think made her a very bad choice for the leadership to begin with.
And I'd agree with you there, and I think her methods she went by were fine, but I'm just still, I think that you really pushing culture, decency, practicality as something that should be integral to government and politicians and governance. I mean, that to me leads to moral relativism, because those things change year by year in society. I don't think pragmatism is the be-all and end-all. I don't have a problem with principle.
Well, I mean, I think moral relativism is very much what you get in a pure libertarian utopia, because then
Not
everything
at
is
all.
sort of determined. No, because then everything's determined by the market, right? I mean, whatever is most popular in the marketplace is sort of sets the cultural tone
But I don't
of
shift
the day.
my principles. People might outnumber me, and then that's where the vote goes, but I'm not going to shift my principles, which is what you're exhorting Danielle Smith to do to some degree.
No. But I mean, you're perhaps more committed in your principles than I think most people tend to be. I mean, most people are influenced by products in the marketplace that are culturally influential. You know, they are influenced by television and by movies and by you know, all sorts of other sort of cultural products in that sort of sense. And I think that some people are very highly influential or influenced by these kinds of things. And I think that there is a cultural consequence to a completely unrestrained market, to a completely unrestrained society in which your only good is what is most popular. I do think that has a tremendous culturally erosive consequence that as I said, I just don't think libertarians are particularly interested in dealing with the consequences of that, because, as I say, their great truth is whatever maximizes individual freedom in the moment.
I hate to echo Danielle Smith's closing line on that clip you saw, but JJ, we will have to agree to disagree.